I've always had a type tall, confident, and commanding. The kind of man whose presence alone demands attention. There's something captivating about strength. About the quiet assurance of someone who knows exactly who they are. I wish I could say my husband, Richard, is that kind of man. But he isn't. He never was. Richard is polite, intelligent, and incredibly successful. A financial analyst obsessed with numbers and strategies. He plans everything down to the finest detail, including our marriage. I was an investment, a perfect match in his well-calculated life. In return, I got security, the Manhattan penthouse, the designer wardrobe, the elegant lifestyle. It was a fair trade. But security doesn't always spark excitement. It doesn't set my pulse racing or make my heart pound in anticipation. And sometimes, just sometimes, I crave something more. Last week, I booked a massage at an upscale spa in Midtown, a sanctuary of tranquility, with soft linen, warm candlelight, and the soothing scent of eucalyptus and lavender in the air. I had been there before, but this time was different. His name was Marcus. The moment he entered the dimly lit room, I noticed him. He had an air of quiet strength, his posture assured, his presence magnetic. He was easily over 6 feet tall, built like someone who understood the discipline of movement. His hands strong, skilled, were the kind that spoke of experience. "Lie down," he said, his voice calm and steady. I obeyed, settling onto the plush massage table. The silk robe slipped from my shoulders, exposing my back to the warm air. I focused on the flickering candlelight, steadying my breath, preparing for the familiar routine of relaxation. Then his hands touched my shoulders, and everything shifted. His movements were precise, practiced, and yet, there was something more, an awareness, an energy in the way his fingers worked through the tension in my muscles. It was professional, yes, but there was a depth to it that made my breath catch just slightly. His hands traveled along my spine, applying just the right pressure, easing away the weight of the week. "You're tense," he murmured, his voice smooth and deliberate. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. "It's been a long week," I replied, my voice measured. He nodded, continuing his work, his touch steady. But then, just for a fraction of a second, his hands hesitated. A moment so brief, it could have been nothing, yet it wasn't. The air in the room thickened, an unspoken awareness settling between us. He exhaled, adjusting his grip, returning to the careful professionalism expected of him. But we both knew something had shifted. I could have ignored it, should have, but instead, I glanced toward him, my voice softer now. "You're very good at this." A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I try." The way he said it was confident but not arrogant, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. His hands moved to my arms, his touch lighter now, tracing gentle pressure along my forearm. "You should take better care of yourself," he murmured. His words lingered in the air. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. His eyes held no pretense, only quiet certainty. A long pause stretched between us. Then, with careful precision, he lifted my wrists, his fingers brushing over my skin in a motion so subtle, it could have meant nothing or everything. The moment passed, fleeting yet undeniable. He resumed his work, the session continuing as though nothing had happened. But as I left the spa, stepping out into the cool evening air, I knew something had, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I wanted to ignore it. A pulse of something unspoken passed between us. The way he held my wrist light firm, careful, was both grounding and unnerving. I felt the warmth of his skin against mine, the quiet strength in his grip. His fingers lingered for just a moment too long before he finally released me. "Better?" he asked, his voice unreadable. I exhaled, slow and steady. "I think so." He studied me for another second before nodding. Then, as if nothing had happened, turned back to his work. But as his hands pressed into my back again, deliberate and firm, I knew something had shifted between us, within me. And by the time the session ended, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back. I exhaled deliberately. "You're very good with your hands, Marcus." My voice barely rose above a whisper. His eyes darkened. "You have no idea." He reached out then, slow and purposeful, his fingers brushing over my thigh. It was barely a touch, but it was enough to send a jolt of heat straight through me. He was testing me, waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. Instead, I lifted my chin, silently daring him to go further. That was the moment. The last thread of restraint snapped. His hand slid higher, fingers pressing into the soft fabric of my dress. His grip both firm and possessive. I gasped, my body tensing under his touch. I should have felt conflicted, but all I felt was alive. Then a knock at the door. We both froze. The sound was sharp, cutting through the thick air between us. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Miss Taylor." A woman's voice, the receptionist. "Your session time is almost up." I sucked in a breath, my mind racing, my body still buzzing from something unfinished. Marcus's grip on me tightened just slightly before he exhaled, pulling away with slow, controlled movements. I straightened my robe, my hands trembling ever so slightly. Another knock. "Miss Taylor?" I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Yes, I'll be out in a moment." Silence. Then the sound of footsteps retreating. I let out a slow breath, my heart still pounding. When I turned back, Marcus was watching me, his gaze intense, unreadable. "This isn't over," he murmured. His voice wasn't a question, it was a promise. I met his gaze, my lips curving into a slow, knowing smile. "No," I agreed, reaching for my purse. "It's not." I pulled out my phone, sliding it across the table toward him. "Put your number in." He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the phone, fingers moving quickly over the screen. When he handed it back, I glanced down at the contact name. He had typed, "Marcus, the one you won't forget." A thrill ran through me. He was right. I wouldn't. As I walked out of that room, my mind spun with everything that had just happened, every glance, every word exchanged. My skin still tingled where his fingers had brushed against mine. And I already knew what I was going to do. Tomorrow, I would be home alone. Richard had an early flight for a business trip. And Marcus was going to pay me a visit. The next morning, I woke before Richard's alarm. I lay there, watching him for a moment, his chest rising and falling, his face relaxed in sleep. He looked peaceful, innocent, clueless. By the time he left for the airport, I was already dressed in silk beneath my robe. My skin, moisturized, glowing. The air carried the scent of my perfume, warm, intoxicating. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 10 a.m., a knock sounded at the door. I exhaled, steadying myself, then walked barefoot across the cool marble floor. When I opened the door, he was there, Marcus. He filled the doorway, his presence overwhelming, like a storm about to break. He wore a fitted black t-shirt stretched over his broad chest, emphasizing the strength beneath. His arms, sculpted powerful, made the fabric strain against his muscles.